Thanks you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me again. How are
Uh,
you?
I'm okay. It's really good to see you. Thanks everybody for joining us. Just before I introduce Mohammed, just a quick word about next week. Next week will be at our normal time, Friday at 1 p.m. We're going to be joined by Munter Isaac, Palestinian pastor from Bethlehem, who's gained a fair amount of attention recently for the statements he's been making. So that'll be from 1 to 2 p.m. next Friday. It'll be with Munter Isaac. But today I'm really grateful to be joined by my friend Mohammed Shehada, who I think is just one of the most valuable voices that anyone can follow on social media in his writing about Palestine and Israel, about Gaza. Mohammed is originally from Gaza, and I just find has a both an intellectual and a moral clarity that has really helped to inform my views a lot. So, Mohammed, thank you for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to talk to you again.
So, the particular reason I was eager to talk to you is there's been a lot of attention in the US media to these protests against Hamas, and a lot of people making claims about what this means. So, I wonder if you can help us. Just I'll start with a broad question. Why do you think these protests have broken out, and how do you interpret their significance?
Well, the protests that have just broken out have been a sort of a regular occurrence in Gaza since at least 2019. It's a movement that I publicly supported at the time and condemned Hamas when they cracked down against them. The movement was simply known as "We want to live." That was the slogan, as simple as it gets. And if, in order for people in Gaza to live, that requires Hamas stepping down from government, then so be it. If it requires Hamas going a step further and reaching a truce, handing over Gaza to the Palestinian Authority or to an external administrative committee, so be it as well. It's people, young people mostly, that never got a chance to experience a day of normal living. Peter and I, we talked about my closest late friend Ali, who was killed by Israel in January last year. And the most painful thing about it ever since, I haven't been able to move on, is the realization that he died before he ever got a chance to experience living, to basically have anything of the basic elements that we call life, to fall in love, to start a family, to put food on the table, to have purpose, to move out of his parents' homes. And that is the situation for the vast majority in Gaza. So basically, that was the slogan of the movement as it broke out again. It broke out a number of times throughout this war as well, but it went under the radar. This time, it started spontaneously in the very north of Gaza when Israel issued immediate evacuation orders, which is expulsion, ethnic cleansing dictates. It's not an order, it's not an evacuation. It's leave now or you will be bombed indiscriminately. So people instinctively, the first thing they tried to do was to just scream their lungs off in futility to heaven. And they started to protest the war itself and say, "Stop killing our children. Our blood is not cheap in the war now." Some people then took a step further and started calling on Hamas to step down from government. And it created a debate internally within Palestinian society about what is required of Hamas to do. It's sort of like a procrastinated moment of reckoning that since the start of the genocide, most Palestinians decided to postpone any criticism of Hamas until the war is over in order to avoid Israel exploiting that criticism to legitimize the war, perpetuate the war, and increase its intensity. But now we got to a moment where people are collapsing and are not holding back anymore. So the main demand is the war ending, Israel withdrawing from Gaza, and Hamas stepping right down from government. Some people took it to a step further and started condemning specific Hamas tactics. So, for example, when Hamas fires these indiscriminate, homemade, improvised projectiles, they're mostly firecrackers that never reach any specific target in Israel. They don't cause much damage or harm. They just activate Israeli radars, and Israel uses it as a pretext to evacuate entire cities in retribution. They hold the entire city collectively guilty for that one or two primitive projectiles, firecrackers, and then they demand everyone there to leave immediately. So I've seen people that have been previously sort of sympathetic to armed resistance and Hamas actively condemning this and say there's no need to do this anymore. It's not causing any harm. It's not bringing the war to an end. So why do it? Others have brought into question other tactics and decisions made by the Hamas leadership. But there's also an element of interference that is basically sabotaging the movement. It's a movement that many players wanted to see in Gaza for a very, very long time, since 2006. For Israel, the rationale of the blockade in the first place was to use economic warfare, as Chuck Schumer put it, to strangulate the population in Gaza, the civilian population collectively, to force them to rise against Hamas. So as soon as you see these protests breaking out organically and spontaneously in Gaza, the grievances they have are representative of the majority of the population there in terms of demanding Hamas steps down from government, because Hamas's government has been Israel's golden pretext to maintain the siege, the blockade. As soon as this happens, what you see is Israel trying to take it a step further, as well as other actors, other Arab regimes, the Palestinian Authority, Fatah, etc., to settle scores internally or to take the message out of its context and vindicate Israel's war. So the Israeli approach, as soon as these protests started, was not to show any sympathy to it. The Israeli talking point has been for a very long time: there are no civilians in Gaza, there are no innocents, everyone there is Hamas. But when these protests broke out, Israel's reaction, Netanyahu, the prime minister, and the government, the media, the mainstream, was to say, look, these demonstrations vindicate us. They prove we've been right all along to bomb Gaza, level it to the ground, starve everyone there. And if we increase the pressure on them, if we intensify the bombing and killing, more people will rise up against Hamas. So, like, there's no winning at this point. And this sort of interference and instrumentalization of the demonstrations is always what kills its potential, because it makes it extremely easy for Hamas to point a finger at Israel's support for the protests or Israel's weaponization of it and say, look, if you show up for these demonstrations, you're siding with Israel, you're a collaborator. This is not an internal Palestinian movement, this is pushed by an external agenda. So you see an element of interference that is undermining the potential and the growth of this movement in the first place. A lot of people want to show up, but they can't, because if they do, a demonstration that is backed by Netanyahu and Israel cats would render any participant in it someone doing at least doing Israel's bidding unwittingly or an active collaborator. And then there's the other element. Israel is bombing the very areas where these demonstrations are taking place. So if you show up, if you go on a road on foot for dozens of kilometers to protest Hamas, the chances of you being killed on the way are significant. And the last element is you see that Israel has no interest in seeing these protests succeed at all. If they had any shred of interest in that, they would do one of two things. Number one, say, okay, we see now Gazans rising up against Hamas. We will suspend aerial bombardment, indiscriminate shelling, and let Gazans handle each other. Or they would, number two, make an offer to Palestinians. There's this AIPAC talking point. Why don't Hamas surrender? Why don't Hamas surrender? Surrender has its terms. Like when Japan surrendered, when Germany surrendered, there were terms of surrender. Surrender, and there will be massive reconstruction. There would not be any sort of settlements built in your country. We will not kick your people out. We will save your people in their country. The hundreds of billions that were poured into Europe by today's equivalency in US dollar and in Japan as well to reconstruct it after they surrendered. You don't have anything comparable. What you have on the table is Israel saying, if Hamas surrenders or if these demonstrations topple Hamas and Hamas disarms, returns the hostages, and the entire leadership leaves Gaza, Israel would still occupy Gaza and implement Trump's plan, kick everyone there out.
Right. You know, this is a point that you have made, Mohammed, I've seen you make that, which is when people in Gaza look at the West Bank, where Hamas is not in control, they see that Israel can operate with impunity. So for the people who are protesting, given that what you're suggesting is that even if they succeeded and Hamas were to leave, that Israel would still, in your view, continue to act in the same way, why then do you think they're doing these protests? What do you think they hope would happen?
Well, people in Gaza, what they hope would happen is to at least a point of desperation where you're trying to make your voice heard to whoever's going to hear it. And there's also the desperate hope that these demonstrations might create some sympathy around the world to show that not everyone in Gaza is Hamas. At the same time, what I've seen, and I checked with Israeli colleagues and friends like Daniel Levy and others, and I asked, what is the Israeli mainstream reaction to these protests? Does it create any sympathy? They said, no, to the contrary, it's creating a reinforcement effect, a doubling down impact, where Israelis are saying, look, we were right all along. The war is the answer to rile up Palestinians against each other. Or you have even Israelis doubling down on dehumanization, saying, look, why are Gazans showing up to these protests now? Why didn't they do it before? It's because Hamas is losing, not because they hate Hamas. Or why is it only a few thousands that are showing up to these demonstrations? Why isn't the entire population showing up? That means the rest of the population is Hamas. And my favorite Israeli talking point, and I've seen it in Ma'arif by a prominent Israeli journalist who claims to be an Arabist who understands Arabs better than themselves, and I've seen it like sources within the Israeli government. He basically says these protests are staged by Hamas to fool the Trump administration into believing that there are innocent Gazans, so he wouldn't kick them out. So you see an insane barrage of Israeli talking points to reinforce the genocide, to double down on what they're doing in Gaza already. And then there's the other element that is quite surprising for me is as soon as these demonstrations started happening, PR firms that have been religiously pro-Israeli and think tanks, conservative Jewish outlets in the US, and PR firms in Israel itself have been promoting the protests immediately. So I have a journalist, a friend of mine at the Jewish Currents. She said that her inbox was bombarded, flooded by emails from all those pro-Israeli groups that are supporting the demonstrations in Gaza, that are offering to connect her with Gazans that hate Hamas. And I talked to another journalist from a mainstream media outlet in the US that is usually very biased towards Israel. He said it's working. The Israeli goal is not to promote the protests and see them succeed, but it's to overcrowd the airtime with anything but the war, to distract completely from the genocide. And it's working. He said the editors in chief have deprioritized any coverage of the war in Gaza. The only thing they care about is the demonstrations.
This has been a free preview of my weekly conversation. If you'd like to hear the rest and support my work, please consider subscribing at peterbeinart.substack.com.